Greetings,
Okay.
voluntary minarchists. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I'm Patrick Smith. Today we have a viewer who requested to have a conversation with me, and as you guys probably know, I try and keep an open door policy for anybody that wants to have conversations. I am out in the world always looking for good conversations, and so we might have one here today with someone that calls himself a voluntary minarchist. He has been a supporter of the show for several months and a very frequent participant in our Discord server. He doesn't have video today. That's fine, though. We can do audio only. He joins me via Discord audio. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hi, Patrick, and thanks for having me on the show. It's really good to be here, and appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion.
Sure. So this is like really impromptu, I haven't shaved or done my makeup or anything. So I got about 45 minutes for you. I noticed yesterday, I think, that you had changed your name in our Discord server to Voluntary Minarchist. And me, being a cheeky bugger, as you'd probably say in New Zealand, maybe? Or is that Europe?
A cheeky bug is quite a common expression in New Zealand, definitely. So, yep, you're on.
So being a cheeky bugger, I changed your nickname to Square Circle, which initiated this conversation. So if you could please maybe tell me what exactly that position is to you. What do those words mean to you? And when you put them together, can you just kind of explain it to me?
Well, one of the critiques that anarchists have of traditional states is that they say, well, the traditional consent argument of people that say, well, if you don't consent to the state controlling you or the state's laws, you can just leave, right? And they say, well, one of the popular critiques of that argument, well, there's no real stateless area to go, which I agree with. As the world is right now, there's nowhere where people can. Living in Antarctica is very harsh, and it'd be very hard to live there, right? And that's the only, as far as I know, that's the only where on Earth that is stateless. So as things are at the moment, I agree with the normal critique that basing consent on if you stay in a state in an area, then you consent. I agree that normal definition is rubbish. But I started to think about the possibilities of how to set up a minarchist society. And by minarchist, I mean minarchist in terms of a state that only provides law and order and defense, nothing else. Well, it provides law and order in terms of making sure no one is victimized, as in apprehending murderers, rapists, assaulters, thieves, and also providing order and order in the sense of courts upholding and enforcing contracts, but there'd be a complete separation of economy and state, so no redistribution of wealth or any of that kind of rubbish, and it would. And in my view, you could set up it as voluntary, because anyone who becomes of age and is old enough to sign a contract would physically sign a piece of paper saying, I consent to this state. And if they didn't consent to the state, they wouldn't sign that piece of paper, and it would be the state's responsibility to set aside a geographical area close by where it was designated stateless, so the ANCAPs could go and try the
live in the zoo.
Well, no. I would really hope it wouldn't be a zoo. they could try and see if it works. And if more and more people decided to not sign the contract with the state, then it would be beholden on the state as part of its constitution or basic rule, however you set it up. That the more people that vote that decide not to sign up to the state, they would be obligated to increase the area, the stateless area. So the stateless area would be proportional to either the people that are in the state or had decided to opt out of the state. So if heaps of people decide, no, this ANCAP idea is working perfectly fine, I'm not going to sign this contract, then the state area would shrink, and the ANCAP area would grow, and vice versa, so long as the ANCAP area wouldn't have to have a minimum size, a minimum fair size, so that there's always a place for people to go if they don't want to live in a state. And I'm talking about an area that's habitable, not extremely difficult to survive in, like Antarctica.
Oh, well, thank you for that, benevolent dictator, for giving us plebs a comfortable zoo.
well, I'm definitely not trying to be a dictator. So
a comfortable zoo that automatically resizes. That's
Okay.
very. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Do I have a choice in the matter?
Do you have a choice in the matter in regards to what? What specifically? Sorry.
Being sent off to this zoo.
Oh, well, you see, I used to think, no, ANCAPs could still live in the same area as the state, and they could have their own private police and private courts and so on and so forth, and they could live their lives according to that system, and people that signed up to the state could deal with the state police and the state courts. But for reasons why I'm going to get into shortly, which is namely why I think laws have to be uniform, I sort of thought, no, maybe that wouldn't work. Maybe there'd be too much mayhem and bullets flying and too much lack of or consistent law and order to keep people that wanted to be in the state area safe. So,
well, let me point out a couple things. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that you're talking to somebody that was born in America, and we are regaled with tales of our forefathers fighting the revolution for freedom, and the result of their fight, the result of their boogaloo, so to speak, was a minarchy, was the smallest state government imaginable. And what did it turn into? Probably the greatest, most vile empire the world has ever seen, with the most ubiquitous power. We are far less free than we were. We are far less free than we were under British rule. And of course, I'm collectivizing with those we's. I was never under British rule, and I had nothing to do with the constitution of this government. But the nature of government is to grow, and I think it's hopelessly utopian to dream that this minarchist government that you imagine will stay, you know, as they say here in America, small enough to drown in a bathtub. The second thing I would point out is that even in a utopian minarchist state, it doesn't change how consent works. And so if somebody signs a contract, they still retain the right to withdraw their consent to this contract. let me give you an example. Let's say, I turn 18 and I sign this contract for this government. And let's say that over the course of 60 years, maybe the leadership changes, maybe the culture changes, the people change their ideas. And one day they vote themselves a law that says that they can murder me for whatever reason. Let's say skin color or whatever. Obviously, I don't consent to this anymore. Obviously, I can and should be able to withdraw my consent. Now, it seems to me you're empowering your mini state from the beginning with the ability to evict people from their rightfully owned property if they disconsent to the state. So you leave me in a choice where once I've made this decision at 18, I never really rightfully own anything. This commune, this communistic collective that you call your minarchist government actually owns everything and can evict people at any time. In fact, it sounds like you're saying that this commune owns the entire world except for the small reservation where the freedom-minded folk get evicted to. So those are the first couple thoughts that I have.
Fair enough. And to the fear of the state growing, I've got to be honest, that's one of the self-doubts I have about minarchist states. But I also have grave doubts about an ANCAP area working as intended, which hopefully we'll get into
your argument. I mean, your argument. You have a hope. You have a fear that the minarchist state will grow. I think it would be completely ignorant to. Or naive is a better word. It would be very it would be almost recklessly naive to assume that it wouldn't. Show me one government in the history of the world that shrunk itself.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Ever.
But maybe
it doesn't happen. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. Maybe we can learn from the United States mistakes. Maybe we could say, all right, the reason it grew was because Congress, for example, passed more and more intrusive laws over time. Maybe we just have a constitution that says, crimes are only crimes if you harm somebody else, and we have a very, very short list of what's considered crimes, and then we don't even have a legislature, so they can't even write themselves new law. So that could be one way it grows. The other way is that you.
So hold on, one at a time. Okay, so let's say that we froze the laws as they were forever ago, and then the internet is invented, and now we have a whole new sort of way of human interaction that causes all new methods, or all new modes of disagreement and rivalrousness over property and over a whole new level of conflict between people. And we can't amend any of the rules that we operate under, voluntarily or otherwise. I'm trying to compare apples to apples with a free society. Free society could certainly keep its operating rules up to date as things move forward and as technology evolved and progressed and new ways of human interaction came along. To sort of say, no, we can't do any of that. We have to. It sounds like it just sounds like freezing your rules in place is a terrible idea because things don't stay static in the world.
Well, that sounds like the argument that and I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, but that sounds like the argument that people against the United States Second Amendment would say, oh, no, the Second Amendment only applies to muskets, which is ridiculous. The Second Amendment applies to any weapons. They didn't, just because weapons have changed doesn't mean you suddenly lose the Second Amendment right to bear arms if you believe in the United States Constitution law, which is another.
The difference being I can disconsent to a free society's rules, whereas the government's Second Amendment is forced on me in whatever state it ends up being. interpreted or used at.
Fair enough.
So I think we're dancing around the point I brought up earlier. So, if this minarchist government does something that I find immoral and I disconsent to it, do I have all of my property forcibly taken from me and get evicted to the Freedom Zoo?
Well, I need to have some more thought about whether people could just people could just opt out of the state but still stay in the same geographical area, but just not have the protections of the state. They'd have to have their own protection, like private police and private courts.
Well, there's only two options. Either you do, in which case, property exists and, I can be rightful owner of things, or property is communistic and your collective actually owns everything. And you really kind of have to choose there.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Let me go on to what scares me about the anarcho-capitalist system, and because then we could talk whether or not letting non-state participants stay in the same geographical area would cause a problem.
Okay, but I want to point out that we're moving from a moral ethical conflict where you might be, if you haven't answered the question, and I appreciate you wanting to think about it, and you're more than welcome to not answer me right now. But the point was, if you forcibly evict me from my rightfully owned property because at some point I withdraw my consent to be governed by your minarchist state, then that is a moral conflict. You are advocating force and the initiation of force and aggression and violence against me to have things your way in violation of my consent, and we have a moral impasse there.
I would say that.
So hold on. So I'm just saying that we're moving on from that part of the conversation now to something that scares you. So we're moving from an actual moral problem into the realm of what worries you about a free society. And it's fine if you don't want to talk about that or answer it now. I just want to point out, especially to the viewers, that we're leaving the entire point behind while we go talk about what scares you. Like if there's if freeing the slaves, to use slavery as an example, back in that time period, if freeing the slaves was a scary thing to you, well, we're putting aside the discussion of whether or not slavery should be a thing, and now we're going to go talk about why it worries you to free them.
Okay, that's a fair enough comment, and I'm sorry if I'm being as bad as a slave owner. Then I really apologize.
That wasn't what I meant. I'm just illustrating the difference between a feels-based argument and sort of a more logical ethics-based argument. So we have to we have to decide whether we're going to sort of guide our life according to ethical principles or our feelings based on our predictions of future outcomes. If we're living our life based on how you predict the future will go, that is a totally different world than if we're trying to live our lives according to objective, universalizable principle.
I would say before we move on from the ethics to the emotional stuff, just now having a very quick think about it. I would say if you withdraw your consent from the contract, and I should have pointed out that people are welcome to unsign the contract at any time. I don't know if unsign's a word, but you get what I mean. But I would say that the government would be morally obligated and legally forced to compensate. They'd have to compensate you fairly and a market rates for all your property, so there's no stealing involved by the government. You'd get just compensation to make.
How is that not theft? That's called eminent domain here in the United States. I don't know if you have that there, but when the government wants to build a road or build a new building, they take your property whether or not you consent to it, and they make it not theft by giving you market value for the property that they forcibly took. It's theft by another name. How is that not theft? I don't consent to it.
Actually, yes, it is. I've just realized that in my brain. I'm sorry. So
No, hold on. Let me just say one more thing. Twice so far in this conversation, you have changed your mind, and that is the most admirable quality in anybody that I've talked to. Like, that is the thing that we should all do when we're confronted with an argument that shows we were wrong on something. We change our position, and I just wanted to give you credit for doing that twice so far. Thank you. But please continue.
Okay. So yes, it is. So then now that you've pointed it out, no, the separate geographical area is a terrible idea. I initially thought it was good by not thinking it through. So no, you wouldn't have to move. You would just but if you legally withdraw from the state, all that would happen is the police and the state courts would no longer provide service to you, and you would have to get private means for protection, like private police and courts. Rights enforcement agencies, I think, is the anarcho-capitalist term. So yes, I apologize. The separate geographical area thing.
Okay. Well, I mean, your world is sounding better and better by the minute. So the next question I would have for you then is, since I can stay on my rightfully owned property and hire and contract for my own security and protection services and justice and law, etc., would I be attacked when I necessarily then provided services to myself and other free people that competed with your services?
No. What I mean in this scenario, like, let's say an ANCAP murdered a person that was signed up to the minarchist state, right? So that means the you would go with whatever the victims was signed up to. So if the victim was signed up to the state, then they would be the perpetrator, like the murderer, would be subject to the state's authorities, state's courts, and you would be thrown in prison for the murder. If you weren't a customer of the state, if you sign up to the state and you were murdered or attacked, the police wouldn't come to your aid because you've opted out of that service. So you would have to, private courts would, but you would be attacked. If you attacked someone that belonged to the state, like you murdered a citizen of the state, it's essentially like the state, because you're in a stateless world, it's essentially like the state going to war with someone outside. So you would be the police, the state police would find you and try you and chuck you in jail if they found you guilty. It's kind of like how you said to me once when we were talking about private police, and I said, well, what if someone didn't sign up to a private police, like if there wasn't arbitration because one side wasn't signed up to? You said, well, no, I forget your words, but you said, no, I forget your words, I'm really sorry. But you said, no, you'd still be protected by the private courts and private police because it's not your fault they didn't sign up. It's like they're in the state of nature. So the ANCAP from the state point of view would be in a state of nature. So if they attack someone attacked the citizen of the state, they would be dealt with by the state and be at the mercy of the state. But the state would leave them alone unless they attacked a citizen of the state. Does that make sense?
You're designing a system that some really, really smart people have spent a lot of time already sort of designing. So rather than try and pick apart what you're saying, let me just start by suggesting that you and other people that are listening, there's a few books that I can think of, and people in Discord that are listening can also suggest books that discuss how competing dispute resolution and justice companies could interoperate. There's something called cooperation. This is when competing companies are still able to work with each other to resolve, the interoperability of their quote unquote technology. For example, phone companies, you can pick up your phone and call a phone that exists on someone else's phone lines because those phone companies have operating agreements that govern the behavior between themselves so as to provide their customers a better service. So in a situation of competing justice or courts or dispute resolution systems, the companies can have operating agreements in the same way that cover the instances that you're bringing up. And I'm just pointing out that there's a lot of knowledge and thought and wisdom that's already been put into this stuff. A few books that are good to read on this would probably be The Machinery of Freedom by David Friedman. Stefan Molyneux has 2 books. There's Practical Anarchy and what's the other Molyneux book? I'll look it up. There's hold on. Anybody in chat know his other book? Practical Anarchy and... Anyway, while I'm looking that up, there has been a lot of thought into these areas. So this area that is scary to you, I understand. It was scary to me too when I was new to thinking about all this, but there are some amazing books on this. So, Everyday Anarchy. So, Practical Anarchy, The Freedom of the Future, and Everyday Anarchy, The Freedom of Now. Those are 2 relatively short books. They're free. I hate to pimp Molyneux's website, but it's here, freedomainradio.com/free. Scroll down the page. You can get audiobook, PDF, or Audible, or Amazon, actually. Practical Anarchy, Everyday Anarchy, and The Machinery of Freedom by Friedman. All 3 of those books talk about this exact problem because it's a very real problem. People have a very real need for dispute resolution. People have a very real need for what happens when one day someone accuses me of murder. I want a system in place that will defend me against false accusations. And I want to I even want a system that will defend people I accuse against accusations that I might make the accusations in good faith, but they might end up being wrong. As a customer of justice, I would definitely want that in place. So what you're describing here is a free society. You're not describing minarchy. You're describing a situation where I can choose to opt into your system, or I can choose to opt into this other competing system, or this other competing system. And very likely these competing systems will have interoperation agreements with each other. Otherwise, it would just be an untenable situation where people would demand a market solution for that exact risk that you're worried about. That's a very real concern by people.
I have done some research into rights enforcement agencies and listened to some of David Freeman's book and talked to you about some of them. I admit I haven't got all the way through David Freeman's book, so apologies. Haven't quite got there. But can I talk about something that happened to me very recently? I haven't even been able to tell you about it off air yet. That made me a little bit more scared about that approach and why it might not work.
Sure. Let me just remind you, because I do have a hard stop in about Uh, 17 minutes. So we have about 17 minutes. Let's make sure and use it, as best as we possibly can. And then the last thing I'll say before I give the floor back to you is that let's remember, like, are we guiding our life according to ethical principles or scary future predictions? Scary future predictions means consequentialism, which means that we get to aggress against people if we think it'll turn out better. I don't think that's what you advocate for. Every time, we've had a lot of talks over the past, 2 months or so, and you don't sound like that consequentialist, my feels make right type of person. But this conversation keeps heading in that direction. You're worried about how it might turn out, therefore force on people. I don't think I'm just trying to connect your tab A into your own slot B, right? Like, you're worried, rightfully so. There are some scary things that really a lot of thought has to go into this stuff. But no matter how scary it is, no matter how crazy the future might feel to you, that doesn't justify forcing people, pointing guns at people to make things happen how you want it to. The floor is yours, sir.
I think we kind of have to. I try and be as ethical as I can, but I also think reality's somewhere in between. You can't be a total outcomes-based person you can't be a total outcomes-based person, but at the same time, ideals are no good if everyone's killed and there's no society that survives under the perfect ideal. But I'll give you a second to respond to that, and then I'll move on to the thing that scared me that prompted the whole conversation.
Well, it's up to you how we use the remaining time. So we can either talk about consequentialism versus ethics, or we can talk about what happened to you.
Oh shoot! I didn't realize the time. And my dinner here has just arrived. Could we pause this and then carry on at some point, or is that not possible? I'm really sorry, Patrick.
It's totally fine. Can you kind of maybe give a closing sentence or two about what you got out of this conversation, and then I'll wrap it up.
Well, I've got a few more minutes because my kid's getting the washing in. So what I got so far is that the conversation so far is you pointed out my ethical flaws, and I really don't want to be like an unethical guy. And you pointed out that even market compensation, when consent is violated, doesn't make it magically consented to. So we don't have eminent domain here, but when you described how it works there, I could understand how that would be bad and that is wrong. My scary thing is that someone recently interpreted the nap in a very extreme way, and so I'm kind of wondering whether we need consistency of law so that the nap is interpreted the same way every time, and so some misguided person doesn't think they can kill a person because they feel threatened when they're not really threatened at all. And I wish I had more time to tell you what happened to me. I wish the time difference between us wasn't there, and I wish didn't have to rely on a carer, so I could just eat later and carry on and eat at a later hour.
Don't worry about Stephen. If it sounds like it's worth it, we can pick this up in episode 2 of Voluntary Minarchism. So okay. Thanks for the chat, and you go get your care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, and you will to have the conversation, and thanks everyone for listening. See you later.